the local bit is really important in the context of this bill. By they receive these, they will work with communities. And it's quite a long way from residents to them to residents, or getting your drove anything, or wherever. So that's a big challenge they've set themselves, I think, to actually establish a series of structures in legislation that will enable them to make sure that works and fits together in very different way which needs to be mediated. Every local authority will have a responsibility to draw a list of community assets. Some of the things on the list of community assets will be straightforward, things like this building, nobody will disagree with that. Where it gets a bit grey and more confused is that we could have a post office which is private, we could have a club, we could have a whole range of things that actually operate in a commercial, quasi-commercial way, invite people with a livelihood, which they personally get, that go on that list. And we certainly, the first of the meetings that we had in Slender in East Riding, in the seaside, we had a chap who came along and genuinely quite worried that if he pulled on this list and he got to financial difficulties, that lots of books are done, he would be sort of trapped, unable to get out of the process of selling it, even if he wasn't able to put on his list. Now, whether it turns out in practice to be like that, because the bill's still grinding through and people are considering those sort of issues, one doesn't know. If you read it at face value, that kind of stuff would happen. But I would say it's not a bad thing for local authorities to be sufficiently aware of what's important in their community, have a list, and people have a right to encourage them to put things on. So it's the unintended consequences of this issue, I think, which are more of a challenge than the actual principle. And ultimately, if that works well, it should enable communities to rally around and preserve things.
Anybody who's doing these services, they might be cheaper, but you've actually got issues down about compliance with all the legislation that's linked to them, and when something goes wrong, who's going to carry the can? Because the local authorities who probably you are contracting this service to have got to make sure that group is doing it correctly.
I think that we felt that there were many opportunities in this for communities and voluntary groups to expand and build on existing services and facilities, to bring in new people and to bring generations together to work together and to build on existing skills and experience. But all that was underpinned by a big if, really. And some of these ifs people have already talked about, the sort of financial implications of taking on new services. There was quite an interesting discussion we had in a couple of different ways, really, about sort of what is a community and splits in communities, and where one part of the community may feel that their interests are in conflict with the interest of the wider community or another part of the community, and how do you manage that? And how do you get through those sort of splits? And will this bill actually help or hinder that process? We also were interested in the issues around volunteers, and we're really keen to say that volunteers are already doing a lot of these things, and we don't want them to be put on any further, and we want them to be looked after and nurtured in what they're doing. And Helen here had some comments that actually, is this raising people's expectations unrealistically? Because there may be some services that it's not possible under the existing legal framework for people to become involved in or to take over, or that might be a more complicated process to do that. And also we had a question about the feeling that some of all this, the sustainability was going to come from philanthropy, and we wondered where the philanthropists were in our area. Not that we're asking you to put your hand up here and now, but so we had worries about that as well.
Bill suggests that you can give the local people a right to suggest votes on any local issue. Just all you need is a petition of 5% of the electorate. 5% is actually quite a lot. And I don't actually think, in the context of what I've just said, that's probably a problem. If you believe in really getting down to it, 5% is quite a lot of people to get to actually force your issues to be put to people. So I'm not too sure. I'm happy with that, but other people may be unhappy with that sort of figure. But that's one of the few figures in this bill. The trouble then is, You have the referendum, you decide 100% of the people voting, which may be 10 or maybe 10,000, say we want it changed. And what happens? Does it change? It might do, but I suspect not. I suspect what the ruling group on the council will say is, thanks very much, we noted that, next time we're for election we'll let you decide then. And hopefully the problem will have gone away. Again, a bit cynical, but I just wonder, have we just raised expectations of people on through this bill to be able to influence things which maybe they could only going to be able to influence in the same way as they used to do at the ballot box. I know of a community of about 7,000 in Lincolnshire who decided that they would like to have some plan of their own. The community, pretty well represented, said we really need about 1,000 more homes here if we're going to keep our shop and our post office going. So they actually had a discussion and said, yes, we want the shop and post office to be retained. There are some sites available because they were consulted by the local planning authority and what it was the SLAR, it was the looking at all of the housing land or potential housing land that might be available around the area. The community looked at all the sites and none of them were selected. So on one hand they wanted development to support their community facilities, on the other they didn't want it next to them. And as a result, no development. Will a shop and post office remain open? I suspect not. So that's a real problem here. We can have one aspiration, but because those decisions are now being taken very locally, or potentially very locally, there's perhaps undue influence by one or two people who could stop developments taking place. Specifically, of course, as is possible here, a poll.
Started off by discussing this nice pot of money. Got lots of issues around how would you access it, who would own it, would you put in proposals, how would all that happen, would it be for a certain geographical boundaried area only, and so on. So having got that all sorted out, we moved on to discuss some of the things that we looked at spending it on. Essentially, we spent it on things that were in the neighbourhood plan. But people did highlight a number of things around unemployed people.
We tried to think of some positive things and we thought, well, it might be another lever that people who are passionate about important things in communities could pull to try and exercise some influence. We talked about some of the challenges in terms of changing things where local authorities have got into very long-term contracts, so they become contract managers instead of democratic decision makers. You know, PFI arrangements, for example, you know, people might not like the way the whole range of things are run. They might have a referendum to change them, but if the council's contracted for the next 25 years to have that arrangement, it's all large and academic and pointless process. So that was generally where we were with referenda. And then finally we had an interesting discussion about parish and neighbourhood planning. And around this table, people had had a mixed experience of parish plans in their current form, which of course don't have any statutory status, but which actually are a very useful thing when they work well. We talked about the importance of expertise and capacity to underpin doing that well, and increasingly important when neighbourhood plans can become funded, which have got a statutory status. And we opined the sad demise of the funding for planning aid, because planning aid is a very useful source of support for communities at the moment in terms of the expertise it can offer. We talked about unlevel playing fields in terms of communities. Some communities that were well-heeled, well-organised might be able to actually reinforce a negative development agenda to actually keep their backyard as they want it. Other communities which aren't well-resourced, aren't well-organised, might not actually be able to get to grips with this and actually use it positively at all. We wondered how long these places would have plans for. Some communities have a very big turnover of people, and therefore the nature and character of the community could change at that micro level. If you've got a 10-year plan, is it really going to be long-term representative of the people who actually set it? We talked about the importance of affordable and social housing as one of the key elements that would be in a neighbourhood plan. The opportunity might give parishes to actually, from the bottom up, underpin mind some of this negative settlement hierarchy stuff that goes on within local plans at the moment that says only bigger places should have housing. So we could see some things that were positive in the neighbourhood planning process, but we could also see lots of issues and challenges. So ultimately, I think, just reflecting back on the three elements we had time to talk about, our view was that this was a bit bitty. It was a bit like seeing the jacket on a tailor's table, and you could see the arms over here and the collar there and the back there, but it wasn't actually like looking at anything that was ever super